Wonderful. Oliver, I'm so excited to have you on. We're going to talk about food and your documentary, Feeding Tomorrow, which is on Apple and Amazon. And honestly, it was just really incredible just getting into, the epidemic that here we are with. I don't even know where to begin. So first of all, watching your documentary, I mean, it's kind of like food is the universal language, right? And everyone gathers around food. And regardless if, we don't speak the same languages or we have different cultures, it's sort of we can sit around and, have a meal and break bread together. And but the way things are, people have been going to Congress saying, hey, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore with all the pesticides, the chemicals. I mean, if you go to Europe, so there's 400 chemicals that are allowed in Europe, and it hasn't changed for many, many years. And for America, it's 10,000 chemicals that we allow. So it's like you see these TikToks and, the side-by-side comparison of, just ketchup where it's like 3 ingredients. And then you see ketchup here and it's like things you can't even pronounce. And, what's really crazy is Alzheimer's. So every disease is at an all-time high. You have Alzheimer's that's super, never been higher. You have heart disease. You have ADHD, you have, oh my God, I listed all the things that are happening, but basically disease and cancers that are all-time high. And I mean, it's kind of incredible. Autism is also at an all-time high. So I think it was 1 in 22, 20. So I think it was in early 2000s, it was 1 in 50. And now in California, it's 1 in 22. That statistic blows my fucking mind. So where do we begin and how do we fix this?
Lots to unpack there. Well, thank you so much, first of all, for having me. It is exciting to see some of our colleagues in the food movement going and speaking in front of Congress and at least having the platform to do so. What you said is absolutely right, and it is both accurate and terrifying. We are in a very, very dangerous state in our food system here in this country. And if you look at the United States compared to the rest of the world, it's a very different situation. And all of those statistics that you just mentioned were not the case decades and decades ago. You can almost directly link the uptick of all of these ailments, issues from chronic disease to autism to all of these different ailments and chronic diseases back to when we started to transition our food system into the industrialized food system. So one of the things we talk about in the film is this deep interconnection between how we grow our food and how we treat our environment, the type of food that produces and the type of chemicals that we use to produce that food, and the role that those systems have on our society. So let's take a quick step back to around the 1970s. When the food system, even a little bit before that, but the food system really, really started to change in a big way. When during the Nixon administration, an agricultural economist by the name of Earl Butz came in and said to farmers, get big or get out. And we started to, as a society, as the United States government, we started to incentivize farmers to grow corn and soy and wheat, and to do so using a lot of chemicals. We basically prioritized huge amounts of growth, and that was the only thing that we invested in.
And that was to feed a lot of people. That was because some people were starving. We were trying to solve a problem, essentially. So some of it was with good intentions. It wasn't a bad intention. But then they're using chemicals that they used in Vietnam to kill people. This blew my mind watching your documentary, that we were using chemicals, the things that we used in war, glyphosate, right,
Yep.
to kill people, we're now putting on crops.
100%. And the initial intention, I think, was not probably a bad one, which was we need to feed a lot of people. There's a lot of issues with hunger, and we figured out how to feed a lot of people. The way that we did that and the systems that have been in place since then have had detrimentally negative impacts on the health of our environment, on the health of humanity, and on the health of society. To your point, we literally took the agro-industrial model from large-scale chemical farming, basically poisons that were used to wipe out huge populations in war, and we transitioned that into the modern food system. And so from the 70s up until today, we have been destroying and degrading the quality of our soil. We have been pumping chemicals into our food system at an exorbitant rate, and we have seen the uptick at a significantly high degree of chronic disease and so many other ailments related to lack of health. So we didn't really have these issues, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. We have them in a significant way today. And when you compare the health outcomes right now in this country compared to what they look like in the rest of the world, like you were talking about Europe, they don't have the same issues as we do. I mean, in the United States right now, almost 2/3 of our population has a chronic disease or will have a chronic disease. We spend north of $1 billion a year, multiple billions if you think about lost productivity, lost wages, on healthcare cost. And these are preventable diseases. So we are at a very, very critical point in the history of our nation where the health of our food system is so incredibly broken. And we can see that through large-scale environmental devastation and degradation, through our soils, lack of clean water, through a really, really sick population. And I also think through sort of the ongoing tension that we feel in the social fabric of our country. That's not the case in many places around the world.
Yeah.
That being said, we are also at a very exciting time, I think, because there is a growing awareness and there is a growing realization about how broken the food system is, and there is a growing recognition that it's time to do something about it.
Yeah.
Because people are sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah.
People are sick and tired of having aunts, brothers, sisters who have cancer at ridiculous rates, young kids who have chronic disease, adolescents. 1 in 5 adolescents have a chronic disease.
Yeah.
And that's not the case around the world. That hasn't been the case throughout, the long line of human history. It has been the case in the United States within the past 100 years. And the sickness that is in our country is directly linked to the sickness that is in agriculture. But at the same time, while that's incredibly depressing, we also know how to fix it.
Yeah.
And that's a long road ahead, but we got to start today.
Yeah, I mean, there was a bunch of people that went to Congress. It was bipartisan, basically saying, hey, I think on both sides of the aisle, Republican, Democrat, Independent, no one cares. Diabetes is, everything. It's diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancers. I mean, autism. It's just like everything has hit in terms of health. I think there was some statistic, and I think I wrote it down somewhere on here, but it was really, really shocking that the amount of people who die in war, it was like something like, I don't know, it was like 6 million or something. Tanner, can you pull that up? About people who are, the amount of people who die in war, I guess it's the people at the rate of disease were dying at a higher rate, and then so it's like, in African tribes, they rarely ever, in like specific African tribes, they rarely had any cancers whatsoever. Like that was never even introduced. That was just a rare thing. Wild dogs never experience cancer. And so I think the food that we're having, this constant processed food, that it's so dead, it's by the time, what's so interesting is you're trying to feed a bunch of people and it's really, really hard. And so when I was watching your documentary, which was so interesting, so this was right during World War II, but they were using oil. They were trying to, get this war machine going. And so two things happened where people found that they could use petroleum or byproducts of oil to spray on crops and they would go greener. The problem with that, they would be like, oh my God, we have green crops. This is amazing. The problem is that the plants would weaken. And so then all these other pests would come in and they would, destroy the crops. So then they had to figure out, okay, well, we have to find a way to, spray the crops with some pesticides to manage the pests and this. And then by doing so, you erode the soil. So now the soil gets weaker. And then by the time it's like, there was some statistic in your documentary that it was like one third of farmland in the past 40 years has been destroyed. So it's just, it's unusable after a certain point. So it's, it's this idea where, we're trying to feed a vast amount of people, and but now it's like the pendulum swung so far. We were starving. This was like in crash of in the Great Depression. People were starving, and so then that tipped into now we're all overfed and undernourished, malnourished, and overweight and full of disease.
Yeah, I think one of the arguments that people make for sort of big ag is that it's necessary to feed the world. But it's important to remember that in the United States, 40 to 50% of the food that is grown is wasted at the tune of $350-ish billion a year. So we're growing a significant amount of food, but a lot of that, about half of that, is being wasted. A lot of that, about 80-90% of that, is going to animal feed, to animal feedlots to feed animals. So we're growing too much of the wrong thing in the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And what you said is absolutely true. At first, it makes a lot of sense. Farmers used to plow their fields with horses, and then someone comes along, as we say in the film, with a little chemical spray, and you don't have to work that hard anymore. It makes sense. But for too long, we as humans, and particularly in the United States, we have had this philosophical approach to farming that is, we must control nature, we must dominate nature, and we must make nature bend to our whim. And we must do that at all costs. And to do that, we have brought in huge amounts of chemical, petroleum-based pesticides.
Everything is based in war.
Everything's based in war and oil.
It was mind-blowing. When I heard that in your documentary, it was about like everything is based in war, that it's war on the pests, war, like you're literally using these pesticides that killed people in war, and now we're doing the same thing of like it's war. Everything is, instead of this holistic approach where 100%. It can be a symbiotic relationship where you're using, it's like with Big Little Farm. It's this documentary that I saw, several years ago, but it was so amazing. It takes a long time, but the ecosystem can work for you and flourish and have it be natural where, the birds take care of the pests, and and you have these like gophers, and you have all this, you have the ducks that eat this and the pigs that eat that. And, it's all working together, and it takes time and patience. And
exactly. And the entirety of what's called the agrochemical system has been driven by 100% profit for the food companies, not for the farmers, for the food companies, for the companies that make the chemicals, and for the lobbyists who are part of the whole system. Yeah. And when you prioritize profit, environmental health suffers, or there is none, human health suffers, and societal health suffers. This exciting time that we are in right now is about a paradigm shift. And we talk about this in the film, you talk about Biggest Little Farm, we're talking about the same things. This is a paradigm that goes from our food system being one of the biggest contributors to the lack of human health, the lack of environmental health, to actually being a prominent steward of the planet. And that's the paradigm shift from a degenerative mindset to a regenerative mindset. When we transition to regenerative food systems, it basically means a system of farming that, when taken together through time, enhances the quality of the soil, builds biodiversity, sequesters carbon, and focuses on the health of the soil and the resilience of the system through time. That type of farming, which is called regenerative farming, also called biodynamic, there's a couple different names for it, but it basically means a holistic way of working with nature to produce food in a way that benefits the biodiversity, the soil, the health of humanity in the long term. And what we know, and we have visited through Making Feeding Tomorrow, and also through our production company, Common Table Creative, we have visited 65 plus farms all over the world, in Germany, India, Colombia, all throughout the United States. And we have seen this from farmers all over the world, no matter what they look like, no matter what language they speak, no matter where they come from. They are applying these regenerative principles in a way that benefit the long-term health of their farm and of the soil and of the biodiversity. And we also know that the health of the plants and the health of the animals, and therefore the health of the humans, are dependent on the health of the soil. So the regenerative farming system collectively focuses on the health of the soil. And when you focus on that, you are growing nutrient-dense food, you are growing food that has the most flavor, which is better to cook with and enjoy, and that is the food that is the most healing. So when we talk about how do we deal with these interconnected challenges of environmental degradation, health epidemics, and societal inequality, it all begins at the soil. And it all begins with how we treat our agricultural systems and how we relate to nature in that way. So that's why we are at such a fascinating time right now, because we have seen what this system, what the negative system has done for decades. We have really clearly, at this point, we clearly have examples in every single sphere of the negative impacts of this system, enough to know that things are pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
And that's the only way I can say it.
Yeah.
We also know that we have solutions to this, and we talk about them in the film.
Yeah.
Regenerative agriculture, holistic health, like the woman Lisa who builds the first working farm on a hospital campus.
Yeah.
Treating food as medicine, but to do that, that food has to come from nutrient-rich, nutrient-dense soil that is part of a holistic farm. We know how to fix agriculture. We know how to fix healthcare. I believe we know how to fix education. We now need the systemic awareness throughout society to help shape policymakers, to help us magnify those efforts. We know now enough about what we've done wrong, and we also know how to do it right. So we're at this very interesting inflection point right now in the course of human history. We're either going to continue down this path and everything is going to get continually worse, or we're going to slowly start to turn the boat around. And over the course of the next 15, 20, 30 years, because that's what it's going to take, we start to transition the entire agroecological food-producing part of this world into regenerative, holistic ecosystems that nourish the planet, nourish humanity, and nourish people along the way.
So how do you do that when the FDA, for instance, is funded majority by pharmaceuticals? Like it's something like 75% of pharmaceutical companies fund the FDA. I mean, that is a huge conflict of interest. I mean, it's
to say the least.
And it's like, you can look this up. I looked this up because I heard this statistic and I was like, no. I mean, like they're not putting it out there. They can't be putting it out there. They gotta be like, no, it's not. And then you see the people who work at the FDA, who used to work at, big pharma.
Oh yeah, and they
or
go back and
vice
forth, back and forth, back and
Oh
forth.
my God. And so then you see it. Wait, Tanner, can you pull this up? You have to pull this up. Oh my God. It'll blow your mind.
Yeah, the special interests that are intertwined are pretty terrifying. And when you also think about the health of, even a company like Bayer, they own 80% of the seeds that are grown in the United States. It's a foreign company. They're also, obviously, the pharmaceutical industry. Bayer bought Monsanto. So 80 to 90% of the seeds that are grown in the United States are owned by a foreign company, but they're also the pharmaceutical company. So the same system that is making us sick and reducing the health impacts of food are the same companies that are then, quote unquote, healing us with Band-Aids once people get sick. So the entire system is absolutely broken. And to your question, Susie, how do we fix it? The old systems that are in place are so entrenched that now is the time for a food revolution. This is what I think we are in the early stages of. This is what I believe we are in the early stages of.
I mean, look at this. Look at this.
Yeah.
Look at
exactly.
this. Look at this.
Yeah.
What? What? Okay, so on the left is the former FDA commissioner in charge of regulating Pfizer. On the right is current member, board of director of Pfizer.
Funny how connected that is,
wow.
right?
What do you know? That guy who was at FDA is now at Moderna.
Yeah. So I think this is one of those issues that, it's not one small policy that's going to change it. It's not taking down the lobbyists is not going to change it. This is something. Do you remember the Women's March after Trump got elected, right?
Yeah.
And the climate march after that? I believe that the food movement is at a place, and this is also the environmental folks, this is the healthcare folks, this is the food movement broadly, which I would categorize as a network of people who realize the system is broken and are trying to fix it. That is everyone from farmers to healthcare people to everyday citizens who have sick parents or kids to entrepreneurs.
Yep.
There will be, I believe, in the next 5 to 10 years, hopefully sooner, a massive food revolution around this country and around the world. I think the only way to fix a problem that is this big is not through one little policy here, not through one little appointment here. The systems that we are up against are so deep and so entrenched and so difficult to unwedge that I think the only thing that is going to move this thing forward and get the attention of policymakers in a serious way is millions of people in the streets demanding it to be different. Grassroots awareness. Years ago, one of the first films we made was called We Unite, and we got hired to create this film about a citizen and farmer demonstration that happens every year in Berlin. And basically, tens of thousands of citizens march together with hundreds of organic farmers who drive their tractors into the city of Berlin to meet with these citizens. And it started with just a couple dozen farmers and a couple thousand people, this small little gathering. But over the years, it has blossomed into this insane movement. And this is not angry people yelling, right? This is families on top of tractors. This is people dancing in the streets, playing drums, cooking food together.
That's awesome.
This is what we need. This food movement, I believe, needs to be a party. We need tens of millions of people around the entire country coming into the city centers of every major city with farmers on tractors together, a broad coalition of people from the agriculture, healthcare, education worlds to demand that things are done differently. And I think we are approaching a tipping point where that will no longer be an impossibility, that will be an inevitability. And I'm excited for that day. I believe it will happen in our not so distant lifetime. And I think a movement of this magnitude that is so existential to not just the health of humanity, but to the long-term ability of humans to be here on this planet. Because we're also talking about our ability to grow food with climate change and global warming and everything. This movement demands an incredible amount of human energy dedicated to it. That's why I think films are so important, storytelling is so important, raising overall cultural excitement and awareness about this, but not being doom and gloom, saying we know how to fix these problems. And we can create a world that is more delicious, that is more just, that is more regenerative, that is healthier for everybody. And we're going to do it.
So, okay. These, well, not to be on doom and gloom again, but
hit me.
Okay.
There's plenty to talk about.
This. Oh my God. So I was reading this. So the American Diabetes Association gets millions of dollars from Coca-Cola and Cadbury, and also gets millions of dollars from Mead Johnson and Abbott Nutrition that make baby formula. And so 95% of people on the USDA, I'm just going to read some statistics because I want to kind of break this down, because when there's all these laws that are in place and the things that are it's based on, we're talking the whole world has to agree, because the people that are, want the bottom line, which is, money or greed or whatever. And maybe there was some, goodness, there was a good intention in the beginning, and, all best plans can go astray. And I feel like, in addition to people just aren't aware, or it's like coupled with, maybe some nefarious people who are just like, So here's some statistics that I wrote down because I was so excited to talk to you about this. But 95% of people on the USDA Food Guidelines of America Committee have conflicts of interest with the food industry. So there was this report, and this is kind of some of the things that it was based on. It's 1909, the Flexner Report from John D. Rockefeller. Now we can get into that because that is some serious shit, and you guys can look it up. So John D. Rockefeller, his personal lawyer, wrote a report for Congress that set the standard today for medical education in the binding guidelines that holistic and nutrition is pseudoscience, and that we need to cut out the problem or prescribe it. So, and we still follow 1909, like that guideline today.
Lovely.
So and Rockefeller, so he was like he was the father of pharmaceutical industry, and he created drugs kind of similarly to what we did in war when we were creating the byproduct for oil to put it on plants to make them grow. So he created drugs from the byproduct of oil production, and he was one of the first investors of Johns Hopkins and other major medical institutions, University of Chicago, and so he was sort of demanding that that his inventions and drugs were the way to go, and so there was sort of this history of kind of nefarious thinking, and then he had a son, John D. Rockefeller, and so he struck it big in oil, and he had a really, really bad reputation. And how he tried to counter that was he's like, in the press, people were just saying that he was, this big oil guy who was really, bad news bears, and, that he was really selfish, and he was not a good guy. And so what he did, he started creating commercials, and you see these like old timey commercials of John D. Rockefeller handing out dimes and being like, here. So, and then he bought up the PR. He's like, you know what? I'm so rich that I'm going to buy the PR. And then he started investing and being one of the top investors for Johns Hopkins and University of Chicago and all these medical institutions. And so he then suddenly realized the game of things, that he could kind of, have his hand in everything, and then started piecing together of like, oh, I'm going to have my hand on this, and I'm going to control this, I'm going to control that. So no one could say anything anymore.
He's putting all the bills.
So, and I kind of think, and this is not a conspiracy, but when you see if you just follow the money, and if you see the things that he's invested in, or the Rockefellers, and I know I have some friends who are friends with some of the family members, and I'm sure they're great, and but I guess this sort of mindset of it's, I don't know them personally, but it doesn't seem good when you have all that power and control. So when someone is kind of talking shit, and then you're like, well, guess what? I'm going to buy you guys. I'm going to buy you guys here. Now you can't say shit. Now I'm going to buy this. I'm going to buy that, education. And so he wanted to instill a curriculum, that it's like his way of thinking was implemented in, and so he changed because he foot the bill, and he was like funding a lot of it. And it's kind of what's still happening today, where it's like, in Harvard and all these, places where they're getting huge grants from these big companies. And so how do you change the system when it's sort of that same sort of idea in place, where it's like, I think a lot of people, the reason why podcasts are blowing up, it's not a conspiracy. There's a reason why you have podcasts that are getting numbers like they used to get back in the 80s, when you watch television, and they're getting, 50 million views, and, no one's watching TV anymore. No one wants to watch cable. And so, so people are interested in, hearing the great minds and like what's really happening, because we're not getting, the real information anymore. We're not getting what news used to be on either side. So it's just, the main news are just, it's not what it used to be. So how do you, when you have this huge wave, when you have, these huge companies investing, and, it's like lobbyists with, it's kind of where politicians, they're bought and sold and paid for by, big pharma or these huge companies. And so there's a conflict of interest of, hey, I'm going to do this for you guys, but then they can't, because, they do these backroom, like, hey, I'm going to speak at this, and I'm going to get like millions of dollars to help win my campaign. And so now they're, it's very LA Confidential, where they're sort of beholden to these companies. And now, because they funded their campaign, so this is kind of the issue, that it's like, how do you change this fundamental thing? So I know it's like grassroots, but it's kind of like David and Goliath a little bit. Sorry, that was going on a long thing.
Preach. No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And it's infuriating, because it feels often like the forces that we are up against are so entangled and so entrenched and so powerful that it's easy to say, fuck it, throw your hands up. Like, what can we do? And to your point as well, there was big issues with the big agrochemical companies donating to all of these agriculture schools. And so generations of farmers have grown up learning that the agro-industrial way of farming with the chemicals and the fertilizers and the pesticides is the only way to do it. Several generations have learned that in university because those universities were directly funded by
do you see what I'm saying?
100%.
How do you do it? Because the whole
For sure. For sure.
I'm getting so pumped.
I totally agree. I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
I would say the only way, I believe, to create real change is to highlight and exemplify a better model. Trying to tear down the old system is, I believe, a waste of energy. I think we need to call out the old systems for how broken, hypocritical, ineffective they are, because people, real people, everyday people can see that on a daily basis. They see that in the political system. They see that in the food and health system. Our job as documentary filmmakers, as storytellers, is to highlight, to call out that BS, and then to say, by the way, we're not gonna just fight. We're not gonna give these people any attention. We're gonna show you that we already have a better way of doing things, and we're gonna put all of our energy into supporting and highlighting the farmers that are doing it the right way, the healthcare professionals that are building school farms, the schools that are building school farms and growing healthy food to feed their kids. We're going to put every ounce of our energy into building a new system. That is empowering. It's really easy to look at the myriad of fucked up systems that are deeply entrenched and to look how all interconnected it is and say, and this is true with the climate argument too. For so long, it has been, there are so many things that are out of our control. Big oil, the lobbyist, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And the majority of it is out of our control. That's correct. But what is in our control? What is in our agency? What isn't? What is in our control is the food that we buy, the companies that we support, and what we do with our dollars on a daily basis.
Yep.
And there's a big range there depending on what that amount of dollars looks like, who you are, and it's not easy and it's not always black and white. However, there is a significant amount of agency with your food choices. And this is why I believe so deeply in this. Through our food choices are one of those things. We buy food, maybe a couple times a day, a couple times a week. At least we're eating a couple times a day, hopefully, maybe not everybody, but in general, how we spend our food dollars is a vote for the kind of system we want to support.
Yep.
Do we want to support the shitty processed food industry and who's owned by big tobacco and that whole system that's destroying the environment? Or do we want to go to the farmer's market and support the local farmer who's growing in accordance with nature? Do we want to vote for a politician that we know is absolutely, hung and bought and paid for by big lobbyists? Or do we want to vote for a politician that we think is doing things a little bit better?
Yeah.
I think the power of consumers is profound. And we need to live in a space of not blind optimism and hope, but in possibility and in action and in agency. And our daily food choices are a powerful, potent, hopeful reminder that we can have agency in what we do. And when we realize that our food choices can go from having 2 tomatoes or pick any product. Product A can come from a system that is destroying and degrading the environment, being pumped full of chemicals and being supported and paid for, where the farmer isn't making any money and the companies that are supplying all the chemicals are making money and supported by those politicians. Or we can choose to support a food system and farmers that are helping to restore and regenerate the earth through the food choices that we make. And I think once we realize that our choices can go from having a net negative impact to a net positive impact, we start to think about, where are our clothes coming from? Am I supporting fast fashion, or am I getting a thrifted shirt? Well, how is my car being powered? You begin to, the food choices are our entrance into a broader way of
electric cars. I hate them. They'll be.
I know you told me about it.
I hate them. I can't. I've tried. By the way, total separate rant. But
I'm not
my God.
I'm not here to just think about it, talk about electric cars yet. I have a hybrid, which is kind of in the middle.
I have a hybrid too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Point there being, and just to say it another way, we need to focus on what is in our control.
Yeah.
And we need to focus on what we can do and what is possible.
Yeah.
One quick example, many years ago, Walmart didn't used to serve, and say what you will about Walmart. I'm not here to advocate for Walmart, but as an example, Walmart never used to serve organic milk until moms across this country wrote so many letters to Walmart saying, we want organic milk. Walmart not only listened, they are now the biggest distributor of organic food products in the country because of their scale.
Oh my God, what? Walmart. Okay, go on with your bad self.
That's right. So my point there is businesses listen when the bottom line is the bottom line.
Yeah.
Politicians ultimately will listen. Obama famously, who I love, didn't used to even support gay marriage until it was polling in a favorable way.
Yeah.
We need to remember that these folks listen to us. Even big companies like, General Mills or whoever, they now have a regenerative food product line. Maybe not because they are driven by some environmental, ecological stewardship, but there's enough people in the world or in the country who are saying this is important to us.
Yeah.
And so they're shifting. That's what we need at all levels. That's why I'm saying that we need to focus on the things we can control. To live in a place of everything is perpetually fucked is, it is, I get that, but that is not a place that is going to move us in the direction that we need to go in. And there is, and I'm not here to sugarcoat it. I understand. Like there's a lot that is wrong, from the agriculture system to school lunch to health. There are so many things that are wrong that I can get on my soapbox all you want. I love your soapbox. I'll get on my soapbox. But we need to, and this is what we do in our film, and this is what we do as a production company. We focus on solutions, and we focus on tangible solutions where people feel like they can be part of the change. And no one's going to change if you point a finger at them and tell them that what they've been doing is bad and that they need to change. People are only going to change their habits when they feel like it's their decision. So we need to magnify solutions in a really, really systemic way. And I'm really excited and encouraged to see that people are talking about food. Our friends and colleagues, a lot of whom I know, are at Congress.
Yeah.
And they have that avenue to do so. Senator Cory Booker is doing some great stuff with school lunches. It is nowhere near at the level it needs to be, but it is moving forward. And there is a growing, dare I say, appetite for this change.
Woo! Love a pun. Tanner loves a pun.
We love a food pun. But, thanks, Tanner.
I got you.
We need to celebrate the small wins.
Yeah.
And we need to magnify and elevate these wins. I think the transformation of our food system is one of the great issues, challenges, and opportunities of our time. And how we choose to fix it or not fix it is going to be one of the great legacies of our generation. I think we have the capability and the capacity to lead, particularly in California, to lead the food movement, to set an example for how to grow food in a regenerative way, how to support our farmers, how to produce and support healthy food and healthy meals for kids in school. And as California is one of the big ag states, one of the big bread baskets of the country, how do we set an example for the rest of the country? And as a state that has the 5th biggest GDP in the world, how do we set an example for the rest of the world?
Because California, right? California has a big,
fifth biggest GDP in the world, which is insane. So we are sitting in the storytelling capital of the world. We are sitting in
no wonder we pay so many taxes. When I was living here, I was like, Jesus.
Is that why you went back to New York?
Well, no, I went to Utah and I was like, and then I was like, I'm gonna die alone here.
Yeah,
so Utah. I love New York. The pace of New York. That's a whole other thing. But it's I'm an East Coaster and it's just more in my style. It's
Where
built.
are you from again originally?
Boston and Miami.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. So I grew up on the East Coast, and then
We're both from Boston.
Oh my God.
Where in Boston are you from?
Concord.
Concord. I grew up in Charlestown and Brookline.
Oh my God, yeah.
How do we not talk about this?
No. Concord, Carlisle.
You're from Concord, Carlisle?
Concord, Carlisle.
Oh my God. I didn't realize you were I didn't know you were a masshole.
I'm a masshole.
Oh my God.
Yeah, but
maybe that's why we get along.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can sense that now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, New York just suits me better because I think there's just more of a melting pot of people, and I think I like the pace of it. I like the culture. I love the art. It's kind of a concrete jungle, but in the West Village, there's a lot more trees, and I'm right next to a park, so
West
it's kind
Village
of
is quite lovely.
It's
I was
so
just there for
great.
Climate Week. It's lovely.
And the people, you know what? It's weird. They get such a bad rep. They're so friendly. If you ever need help, they're always like there. They're always like, here, let me help you out. Like, they're like, I gotta go. What do you want? But then like, I think they
Everyone
say,
I grew up with is what I'm used to.
yeah,
They tell you how it is, no matter what it is.
yeah,
Good,
no.
bad, or
And
otherwise.
I
You get
always-
the straight deal.
Yeah.
As you know from being from Boston.
Yes.
They'll tell you to fuck yourself if they feel
Totally.
that way.
100. But and I
refreshing.
love that. You always know where you stand.
100%.
By the way, Tanner totally thought you were English. She was like, I'm really expecting him to come in with an English accent because Oliver. So do you
Sorry
you
to let you
have
down, Tanner.
It's okay. I've been let down a lot.
Jeez, sorry.
Not by you.
The bar was low.
Wow.
The
Do
bow was low.
Do you have? By the way, do you have
English ancestry?
Yeah.
I believe so. My dad's side's sort of primarily Italian, a little German, Welsh. My mom's side's like mostly Irish. From Boston's half.
Yeah, I'm like that's that's my lineage.
Everyone in Boston somehow is
English,
half
Irish, Scottish, Italian. Yeah, so that's what it is. That's literally.
and they're all crazy.
Yeah.
I didn't know you were Bostonian.
Oh.
I like you even more now.
Wait, okay. So getting back to our original conversation, you were talking about a parallel structure. So you can't replace what has already been done, but the only way to you can't tear it down because you'll go to war, basically, and we don't want to do that. And maybe like there were some people who had really good intentions, and I think, coupled with being really naive or believing in, I don't know, this like cult identity politics mentality and sticking to not being open-minded enough to be like, hey, everyone's really sick and this isn't working,
100%. And the tone with which we approach this is really important. And I remember asking Mark Shepard, the main farmer in the film, who's also a Boston guy actually originally. That's why he's such a wise ass. I love
sarcastic.
Mark. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, go fuck yourself.
That's a better way to say it. But I asked Mark Shepard, how do we get people to change? And he said, most people, and this is true, and I've met dozens and dozens of farmers of both backgrounds, political affiliations, like they have all been some of the most lovely, wonderful, hardworking people I've ever met, hands down.
Mm-hmm.
And they are here to do good, even if they're using chemicals, and they are trying to feed the world. They're trying to feed their communities. Like farmers are by and large, like really, really good people. They are some of the best of us, hands down. And when you try to get them to change, the way that Mark Shepard described it is they grew up in a system, and maybe they learned how to farm from their uncle or their dad, who learned how to farm from his uncle or his dad or whatever. Not always men, but in general, or in many cases, yes. Pointing a finger at those people and telling them that they need to change because what they're doing is bad is not an effective way to do it.
Yeah.
They grew up in a system, they learned how to do it, they think they're doing the right thing, like they get that.
Same for doctors, though.
100%. But what we're coming to, what we're getting to now, and this happened with Lisa in the film, is they're getting to a place where they're saying the system that we were told is the only way to do it is putting us into massive debt. I can't even let my kids go out in the field and eat the food because there's so many toxic chemicals. I hear this all the time.
They have to go with a hazmat.
100%. And I hear from farmers a lot of the time, the day that they choose to transition to organic and regenerative and to stop using chemicals is the day they have kids, because they say to us, I want my kid to be able to walk out of my house and go out in the field and eat something and not have to wear a hazmat suit or not being able to walk out there. And so more and more farmers are seeing that what they've been sold is a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
They are in debt, not making any money, and using a ton of chemicals. And their soils are being degraded and depleted. And meanwhile, they look at potentially, a neighbor or like someone like Mark Shepard, who isn't using chemicals, who isn't doing large-scale tilling.
All the animals came back.
All the animals came back. Butterflies, bees, lots of biodiversity.
It's so like lush
and
with
you're like,
animals
and
and
you look over next door, and you're like, that place is looking pretty good. So that's why I'm saying, focus on the models that work and then scale those models. One of the organizations we work with right now as a production company is called the American Farmland Trust, and they've been in business for about 45 years. They help farmers. They do a couple great things. Make sure that we don't lose farmland. We lose 2,000 acres a day to development. They make sure that young farmers have access to land. and also they help farmers in the transition to these organic regenerative practices. So there are organizations out there doing it. We believe as a production company, that's what our mission is to help elevate these voices of the farmers who are working on these transitions, but also the organizations, that are out here doing the good work. So as much as we can, we need to focus on the solutions, and also living in a place of endless misery is just fucking miserable. And I don't want to live in that place. I want to live in a place of agency.
Sure.
And I believe that is a far more productive, positive, effective place to be. And that's what we need to inspire in people. And that is what I think is ultimately going to move the needle in a big way. And that is what is going to get us to the place where we have tens of millions of people all throughout the country, hundreds of millions of people all throughout the world marching in unison for healthy food systems.
Yeah.
Within 5 to 10 years.
I mean, that sounds great. I think what the problem is that a lot of people we're not taught in schools about health. I remember being an athlete growing up. I was a top tennis player in the country and traveling all over the country and the world playing tennis tournaments. And it was sort of, you're right there of playing, pro tournaments. And I had like a full ride to Duke. But at the time, I, would go play some matches, or right before I would go to practice, I would stuff myself with double stuffed Oreos and milk and like disaster food. I was, 11.
You didn't know? They didn't know?
I had no idea. And
the double stuffed.
oh my God. And my mom, she started realizing, because she would see the crash. She's like, okay, there's something that isn't working here. And so she was like, okay, and so she started researching and figuring out what is the best food. How can I, something about what you're eating is not good. I mean, probably like cookies. Like she was like, okay, well, that's an easy one. Like, maybe don't eat the cookies.
Just single stuff would be enough.
Yeah. So when she would come home to pick me up for school, like she would just make some meals of like this like grilled chicken, but like really, really healthy, and vegetables, but like a chicken sandwich and suddenly I had so much more energy, and everything kind of changed in my game. And my mom was like, she was getting really clear about what foods I needed. And we see athletes today. We see, Tom Brady. And so to kind of bring it back to
good example, our hometown boy.
To bring it back to your documentary, where I mean, I've watched so many documentaries just about people who have cancer, and if you can the cancer will come back. This is kind of because you haven't changed the environment. If you don't, it's kind of like mold, where if you don't change the environment, you don't leave the house, you don't remedy it, or pretty much just get the fuck out. I think it's just get out of the house. You just get rid of the clothes. You're going to have bad symptoms, and that's kind of what I found. And so it's sort of the same thing with cancer, where a lot of people just don't know. They're smoking. They're like, okay, well, life is hard enough. At least let me have my glass of wine.
I've been there. I get it.
You don't know. Like, there's so many people that don't have the tools. And your body, when you're constantly in a state of toxicity, so, our water has fluoride and chlorine and, terrible things. And, shout out to fluoride. It actually lowers your IQ. So me and my sister had a whole thing, because I was like suggesting, hey, maybe you guys and the kids don't have the fluoride, and so we kind of got into a fight about it. But we're taught, and so she's believing the system of the fluoride's good for you, and that's what we were all told. But I remember with my dentist, she's like, well, because I think there was like potential for cavities, and she's like, I think I need you to put you on some like extra really intense fluoride, but there's going to be some side effects. And I was like, side effects? I don't need that. I
have plenty of side effects already. Thank you.
Yeah. But I mean, I guess to my point is, if we're in a constant toxic world where our water is bad, the products that we use, just like hair care, or just from straightening your hair, these chemicals that you put in, it increases cancer by a lot. It's like something like 20% or something, Jesus. And so.
I have to stop using my curling iron then.
Well, no, it's not a curling iron, but it's like chemicals. It's a hair straightener chemical.
My joke didn't land. Okay.
So it's.
It landed.
So it's like when women want to go get their hair straightened permanently, these chemicals are so toxic. So you have just shampoo and conditioner going through. I have this app. It's EDW. Hold on. Okay, guys, shout out to this because I love this. It's Healthy Living, EWG, Healthy Living. And honestly, it shows you like all the products and what they're made of. And if it's like a level 10, don't use it. And it's like you want to be at 1 or a 2, and it's like all the holistic. So they'll list, you know, these chemicals are toxic. So it's kind of like using AI and being like, oh, this has this. And literally all the products that I was using, it was perfume, it was
everything's toxic.
Everything, because I was experiencing, I went through a mold problem issue, and I was trying to get rid of all this toxic shit because I was having symptoms of like neuropathy and early MS. Every time I would look it up, I'm like, MS, what? And so, which apparently I think it was linked to mold. So I got out of the house and, you know, got rid of, you know, some stuff. And so the tingling, thank God, went away, but it was really, you know, I was like kind of, this is not how my body should be experiencing this. And so I literally, little by little, I was like, okay, let me get rid of all the toxic things. And so shampoo, conditioner, household, you know, products. I mean, everything is just like, oh, this causes cancer, and this causes cancer, and this causes cancer. And then just your food. So I guess it's, you know, I had to, and I'm pretty on top of things. You know, of trying to be aware of your makeup. Like your makeup is toxic. Like it's going into your pores. It's going into your skin. And so I think a lot of people, you know, they just don't know. And so I think, you know, you want the combo of being like ringing the siren of, hey, like we need to wake people up of, you know, our world. So I think when I was listening to this talk on Joe Rogan is, when you're not getting enough sleep, because we're just in a toxic world, and so you're not getting good quality sleep to recover, and sleep is also really essential to recovering from our toxic world. So in all these ways, when you're constantly polluting, and then the air quality and, you know, everything else on top of all the toxicity, it's you need a place, like you need to be able to fuel your body with healthy food so you can your cells can excrete the toxins, and you know you can get rid of it. But if you're constantly polluted, that's where the cancers come in, and that's where, you know, if you're living in this really toxic environment. So, you know, what was interesting just about your documentary was she realized that you have to change your environment. So her dad had pancreatic cancer, and she had an athletic background, so she was like, okay, well, how do I, she was at the hospital and she was supplying the food at the hospital. Is that correct?
She wasn't, but the hospital was just serving the food that hospitals serve,
So, okay.
which is basically a reflection of the industrialized food system and what we serve in schools, which is basically highly processed, just bullshit.
Yeah.
The same food that makes you sick is the same food they serve you in the hospital.
Great.
Yeah, exactly. So you come out of a triple bypass surgery and they give you a bacon, egg, and cheese, and you're like, well, that's great.
Yeah. So I think, so she figured out, okay, I have to change your environment because you got sick in this environment doing these things. It's kind of like Tony Robbins, like if you keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same results. So you have to do something different. So she knew intuitively that I have to change your environment. And I think that starts with food. I mean, the lady in the documentary kind of realized the same thing, that you have to change your environment. You have to start doing something different. And so she figured out with the pancreatic cancer, with her father, that she's like, I need to change your diet. It needs to be completely. So she was getting food from Whole Foods. When Whole Foods used to be good, I don't know, it's kind of getting a little suspect now. Erewhon has been really expensive, but everything is organic there, and everything is like really to the top tier level food. But yeah, so she figured out, okay, we're going to get you on a keto diet. And I've seen so many documentaries where people are healed through a keto diet because now they're changing the environment. They're getting themselves out of that toxicity. And so this lady in the documentary, she also did the same thing. And her father was healed from pancreatic cancer, which is pretty rare. It's like 5% after 5 years are still alive. And he's still alive.
He's still alive today.
That's amazing.
Still alive today. I've talked to her about it. She said he's still alive today.
Yeah.
And he ran a marathon afterwards, which most people perfectly healthy never do,
Steve Jobs,
including myself.
He died within like 2 weeks, or it was like something really quick. It was like a couple weeks. It was like something, or a couple months, but it was like super quick.
And she did a targeted food program that was nutrient dense, specific foods that she knows, that we know, have historically had healing properties that address those issues.
And she followed the top athletes. She followed
She is,
Tom
and
Brady.
And she's the nutritionist for the Detroit Red Wings, the Detroit Lions, and the
what
U.S.
I'm
Olympic hockey team. But even to your point earlier, someone like that, who had been schooled in the sort of like traditional Western medical, someone at the highest level of nutrition had to have her dad come in with pancreatic cancer to say, holy shit, something is not right, and then carve her own path. And I'm excited to say that speaking of positive environments, that hospital farm system has seen so much success.
Can you explain that real quick for the people who haven't seen it?
I will, yes. Well, I don't want to give it away.
Okay.
Well, go watch it. I would say in general, or I'll take a step back. I'll extend that. So this woman, Lisa McDowell, who is the main nutritionist in the film, she's an incredible, profound, Lisa McDowell, you can look her up. She's an incredible nutritionist. She ended up healing her dad, who had stage whatever pancreatic cancer, of which the
5% chance of living
after 5 years,
Yeah.
which is almost nothing.
Wild.
And she healed him through whole food, plant-based diet. She healed him through nutrition, and it is a classic textbook example of let thy food be thy medicine, which was the case in cultures and people all throughout the world, all throughout human history, forever, up until like 100 years ago, maybe a little bit less. So we know that this works. We know that the environment works. And so in addition to a lot of the food that is being served in the hospital cafeteria is coming from that farm, there's classes for people who had a chronic disease or have a chronic disease about how to cook healthier food. Mm-hmm. They are preventing and reversing, in many cases, chronic diseases through nutrition programs. Mm-hmm. There are plots on the farm where doctors from the very sterile hospital environment can come outside and have a little bit of a mental health break, which I have to imagine has a really profound impact. The environment is really important. Speaking of environment, one of the things that I asked all of these experts in the film, farmers, nutritionists, policymakers, educators, entrepreneurs, etc., how do we address these issues, not just in the short term, but in the long term? Every single one of them said to us, we have to connect kids back to real food.
Yeah.
So during COVID, or just towards the end of COVID, we helped build a regenerative school farm at a public middle school in Santa Monica. It is a Title I school. It is I believe it's one of the biggest school farms in the city. It's a little bit less than a quarter acre. Mm-hmm. But one of the moms who goes to that school came to one of the dinners I did, and she said, can you come to speak to the principal about healthy eating and maybe speak to the parents? He and I hit it off, and we suggested, hey, what if we built a school farm? We worked in this little garden there. That went well. And then I said, what if we build a school farm? And there was this like old dog lot that was going to be turned into a parking lot on the corner of the school. With dozens of volunteers over the course of a couple months, we transitioned this little piece of land into a regenerative school farm. We hired a farming instructor, and now every single kid that goes to that school spends at least an hour outside on the farm every single week. We have parents who come to us on volunteer days and say, thank you so much. My child never used to eat kale. During Thanksgiving, I could not get them to eat green beans.
Yeah.
Now I cannot get them to stop because they came out here, they picked it off of the plant, they learned about it, and it's totally changed their relationship with food. And by the way, here's the compost. Because my third grader learned about compost in school, they came back and they taught our family about why it's important. So similarly to the story of the school farm or the school in the film, schools are a really important opportunity for us to not just bring these messages to kids, but kids then bring these messages back home. Yeah. And they become these ambassadors for what's right. Yeah. It was back in the day, I think it was like third graders who helped increase the rate at which seatbelts were worn or helped decrease smoking in homes. Point there being is that I believe, and I've seen this, the simplicity of this school farm is profound in that it is so incredibly impactful, and it's not rocket science. It's a realignment. Yeah. It's a realignment of our values. Every single kid is learning about this. coincidentally, the woman who cuts my hair, her kids go to this school, and I didn't know this. One day I'm getting a haircut, and I'm talking to her, and she's like, "Oh my God, my kids just started school again, and they're loving it. They have this great farm class." And I said, "What school is it?" She goes, "Oh, it's the Will Rogers Learning Community." And I was like, "Georgina, I helped build and found that school." And she goes, "My kids love that school." I was there the other day. Her kids came into the shop after school, and her daughter is pulling out vegetables from her backpack, and she's like, "We had the best time. We're learning about plants and food." And I was almost crying. I was like, this is a beautiful thing. Can you imagine if we took this model and we built a school farm or a school garden, depending on the size, or a rooftop farm, some opportunity to connect with nature at every school, in every part of the country, everywhere? What kind of place could we create? And also, if we could transition the cafeterias who spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year. This is a fun fact for you. So the United States public school system is the biggest cafeteria in the country, meaning the United States public school system serves 7 billion meals a year. That is more meals than McDonald's, Starbucks, and Subway combined, which are the 3 biggest chains in the country.
Wow.
So right now, the majority of that food, as you can probably guess, is...
I ate pizza and ice cream, like literally
100%.
Ice cream all day. I was just like, I'm just going to eat the ice cream. Like my
100%.
parents would just give me money, and then I'm like, okay.
Totally.
You
And
know?
so the food that we're serving our kids right now is
Lunchables.
essentially poison.
Lunchables are, I think,
100%.
the main source of food.
Yeah. So and I'm a very optimistic, hopeful person here, because that's the world I want to live in. If we were to change those hundreds of millions of dollars in food purchasing from the industrialized food system to local farms, and we invested in cafeterias that were cooking food, that were healing and, nourishing our kids, what kind of world could we create? What kind of country could we create? That, I think, is some of the great work of our time. And if politicians and the people leading our country are not talking about the health of our nation, the health of our environment, the long-term success and prosperity of humanity, then what are they doing? So it is not rocket science. We don't need to invent some tech that's going to make this happen. Like, we know how to do this. It's about seizing the initiative. And just one more point on this. Let's not just think about the regeneration of farms, because yes, that is important. Let's think about applying these principles in every facet of our lives. Let's think about schools. Let's think about hospitals. Let's think about public parks. Let's think about the area between the sidewalk and the street. Every part of our urban and rural environment should be part of this restoration, regeneration. We should be growing food. We should be building habitat for pollinators. We should be creating opportunities for individuals to interact with and have access to healthy food and sustainability. And it's not something that should be, it's just for wealthy communities. No, this needs to be the minimum in every community, and it would significantly increase the livelihood and the health outcomes of all of humanity if we were to do that.
Yeah. I mean, what was really interesting in the documentary was that in the very beginning, you have this farmer who, I think grew up. Was it Boston guy? The Boston guy?
Boston guy, maybe? Mark?
I think so.
Was
Beard?
Mark, yeah.
Okay.
White Santa beard?
Yeah. So he was talking about how he would go camping, and it opens up on him, just going up the mountain and having his little tent and doing the thing. And he's looking out, and he's seeing his neighbor cut down all these trees. And by the time, eventually, he just cut down so many trees. I think it was 80 acres of land to build a house, to create some firewood, and to create farmland. He's like, hey, what's going on? He's like, well, I need this and I need that. And so, I mean, is it 1/3 of our earth, like in America, is 1/3 of it? Is it farmland?
It's a little bit less than half.
Oh, okay.
So what he was talking, what his statistic, I believe, was about 1/3 of global farmland has been destroyed or degraded.
There we go. So that was a third.
The third of ecosystems. It wasn't just farmland. It was his. If I believe I'm correct, he was referring to the overall ecosystems that have been destroyed. So think about the Amazon, think about just human ecosystems that have been destroyed to grow food or in general.
And so it's sort of like when you have an expanding population, how do you live with nature? And so that's what was really interesting, hearing that and seeing that, just seeing a guy just being like, I want to build a house, and it's sort of like, I think of the Giving Tree, and it was one of my favorites, such tragic, like, I love that, the Giving Tree, where, he's like, well, I need a house, I need to build a boat, I need a, and then he's like sitting there at the stump, and he's like, and then the tree was happy. So sad. But I think it's sort of, it comes with good intention, but we're no longer existing with nature, and we are built to, basically how the kids were responding to having, doing farming, and, their grades were up and everything on every level, their lives were getting better. They were, integrating with nature, which is, I think, what we're supposed to be doing. And we've removed ourselves, I think, from this industrial-minded way of thinking from the Rockefeller, where he's like, hey, I just want cogs in the wheel and working, in a factory, which was very kind of, it served a purpose, and it really expanded our world in a lot of ways, and, I think created a lot of possibility for technology and doing all these things. But I think, now it's like Neuralink and all these other, ways of being, but we are still so, integrated with nature. And I think this spiritual component that we've removed. And so I think it is sort of a, when I just had Autumn Bear on, who she's my acupuncturist, but I think that there's like, she treats Eastern medicine. So it's sort of before you get sick kind of thing, and, having the body heal itself. And so she was talking about how the way of thinking in Eastern medicine was how it used to be. There was, a tribe of people where they would have these acupuncturist people, and they would, they wouldn't have doctors. They would have, you'd have to pay to be well constantly. So you would pay to stay well. And the minute you would get sick, that would be for free. So it was a reversal. So yeah, it was a totally reversed way of thinking. And now it's like, when you get sick, cut it out or do that, so we're so based and we're so reliant. And this has been this mindset for so long that, you can solve it with a pill. And we're not getting to the root of the problem of, like, there's so many elements. I think Rudolf Steiner talks about this, which I think is based on biodynamic farming.
Yes.
So Rudolf Steiner is a big, I've tried to read some of what he does, and he's kind of hard to read, and he's kind of hard to, but he's really, really fascinating. But biodynamic farming is kind of like a regenerative farm.
It's the
same thing.
Similar,
it's the same thing.
It's essentially the same principle.
The same thing. And so it's keeping healthy soil, and maintaining the ecosystem in a healthy way, that this affects this and this affects that, and blah, 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 blah. But Rudolf Steiner talks about that when you have an illness, there's all these different components to that. You have the spiritual, you have the emotional, you have the mental, you have the environment, you have all these different facets, instead of we're treating the symptom when you have a pill to cut it out. So that's the easiest thing. Go to chemo, but you're not solving the problem. And so I guess, I'm just going back to that idea that, we're not integrated with nature anymore, and we're not integrated, how we're supposed to be living. And so I think, but we don't know any better because we're sort of almost like in the movie Passengers, where we're almost like getting to the point where we're on a spaceship and we're just so far removed from anything. But I think, like, for me, it's like when I went into nature, I was living in Park City for 2 years, and it just was so healing. Just the minute you're just looking up at the stars and you're seeing, you're by a lake with a giant mountain, and you're seeing all these animals, and it's just a different way of existing. At least it feeds my soul so much. And so I kind of think that we're, our culture, if you look at the commercials, it's like, buy this, there's this fear-based. So the way in which our world, and we also are feeding ourselves with what we watch, so it's like, I'm only watching podcasts, so I don't ever see commercials. I pay to not. I'm like, I don't care. I don't want to know. And then I'm like renting a place while I'm here, and every time I turn on the TV, there's suddenly commercials. So I'm like, get it off. But like the commercials are so interesting because it's like there's sort of this like, this is going to solve your problem. This is going to solve your problem. And here, and it's all colorful and bright. And
you got to buy more stuff to
buy
solve
more
the problem.
stuff. You're right. You got to buy more. You got to consume more to like, and so I think it's an interesting thing. So like, I love these conversations because they need to be out there so we can start changing our mindset and the way we look at the world, because I think that is also the problem when you're being fed that like Coca-Cola and have this burger and have this like delicious food that's it looks glorious and it's amazing, and and it's not feeding our souls, it's and so we'll
Feeding our souls.
and so we'll eat the fries that have apparently that the pesticides where they can't apparently they with these potatoes they'll put these pesticides on, and they can't I think they put them into like a shed, and they can't go into that shed for 3 days because it's so toxic. I mean, it blows my mind. So I'm like I mean, there was this whole like TED talk of this breakdown of just the McDonald's French fry that just kind of blew my mind. So I mean, so you have all these commercials, and constantly it's just so easy. I mean, even though I'm like eating healthy, like I'll still be like, oh, get those McDonald's French fries, because they're so good. So you have
they're designed to be insanely addictive.
So the cigarette company, I mean, this was also really interesting. So they intentionally they had ultra processed food. So they took their scientists, and so they sort of rigged the food pyramid, and they also rigged it to make the food way more addictive.
Yeah.
So
once people stopped smoking cigarettes, or cigarette smoking was going down a lot, they're like, we need to hook them on something else.
Yes. So that's what happened. So
and kids too.
Yeah, it's crazy. So the food pyramid was based on like low fat food and carbs, which is like, if you have cancer, it's the one thing you're not supposed to be doing is eating, this like toxic processed food. And so they made, the salty sweet dynamic, so it just is more addictive. And fructose, you have bears in the wild, so right before they hibernate, they're like fighting over berries because it has fructose and it's going to make them fatter and have all the sugar. And so we figured out also with fructose how to make it so it's so addictive. Like we took that component but like amped it up, so now I mean, creating more ADD and more like aggressive behavior. Like I was like, when I was a kid, I had ADD, and because I was eating all that sugar, and so the fructose is making it more addictive, and it makes it you become more you have insatiable hunger. So it makes you more hungry, and then you just keep eating more of it and more of it and more of it. So it's like, how do you get the word out for all these people that they're watching these commercials and they're believing what's in front of them, or what's easy, or what's convenient, or it's Air One is really expensive, and it's like every time I'm like, Jesus Christ, $200 for like 3 juices? It's really expensive. So how do you get the word out to people? How do you start having this conversation more and more? I mean, obviously we're doing that now, and I know people more and more are constantly, and people what everyone did in Congress to kind of to bring awareness to what's been happening. But I think it's kind of having this spiritual alignment of integrating nature. One of my best friends who was an actor, he decided to move in Georgia, and they started their own farm. So this is like during the pandemic. They started their own farm. They're like eating what they make in a biodynamic situation. But what they found also is, how do you feed all these people? They were like, I don't get it. Like, we can barely feed ourselves with this. It's so much work. It's so many hours. They have a cow and some goats and chickens, and then the chickens get eaten by the coyotes, and so it's a whole thing. So how do you maintain that? Because they were like, as much as I his ideas before he had a farm was, this whole, this terrible farming situation with cows where they're, in their own feces, and you see them, just
like the CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations.
Yeah, you see these.
You drive up the 5 and you see them on the side of the road, and it's like
horrible.
20,000 cows, and it smells just god awful.
And the smell is so bad. It's so bad.
That smell in and of itself should just tell you that something ain't right.
And so they have to pump them up with, steroid. They have to pump them up with all these antibiotics because they're living and eating their own feces and shit.
80% of antibiotics in the country go to animals. 80%. That's what we learned from Lisa in the film. 80%. And so there's a lot of issues in hospitals now with antibiotic resistance. So people come in and they can't, the antibiotics don't work because they're resistant to it because they've been eating all this highly processed food. But you brought up an interesting point earlier.
He was saying it wasn't sustainable. He's like, that is, he was like, I don't know.
That is literally the industrialized beef model is the least sustainable thing that we could be doing. We actually asked, in the film, we asked Gidon Eshel, who's a geophysicist, and he sort of created the models and the math on the environmental impacts of various food choices. So he looked at the land, energy, water, and fertilizer that go into producing a calorie of food. So if you normalize all of the various inputs that go into producing a calorie of food, it would be a 1 for a plant on a scale, on a 1 to 100 scale. 1 for a plant, so lettuce, kale is a 1, like almost nothing. 2 to 3 for the non-beef items, so chickens and pigs. And then CAFO beef is 10 to 100, meaning that the amount of resources that go into the corn, the soy, the wheat, the agrochemicals, the water that go into that meat, all the meat that you see on the side of the road, on the 5, is the most the most intense thing from a resource perspective and most unhealthy thing that we could be doing. And you brought up an interesting point earlier in terms of sort of our philosophical approach to our relationship with nature and how that manifests in every part of our lives. And I think for so long, the food choices we make have been hidden. Back in the day, whenever the day was, hundreds of years ago, people maybe lived near a farm, or they would see a tractor go by, and there was some connection to agriculture. I think as people have increasingly moved to cities, and you know this in New York, I know this in New York, as people increasingly move to cities, and maybe people grew up in cities, they never met a farmer. They rarely interacted with nature. And when you don't have that relationship in any sort of a way, or that access to nature, it's really easy, and not by your own fault, to be disconnected from food.
Yeah.
I was pretty disconnected from food for a long time. And I grew up in the restaurant business. My parents are chefs.
You're an amazing chef.
I opened restaurants all over the world for many years. I thought I knew a thing or two about food until I was opening a restaurant in the Middle East years ago. And one night I'm sitting at the bar and I ordered all this food, steak, potatoes, side salad, big glass of wine, all this food. And I looked down at a certain point and I was like, wait a minute, where the hell did all this food come from? And I asked our chef to come out. We had a long conversation. It was like 10 ingredients from 6 or whatever countries. And we talked about how all that food got there. Boats, trains, planes, automobiles.
It takes like weeks and days to get there.
100%.
And then it's been sitting there. I mean,
and it's harvested 3 weeks before it's ripe. And then I saw how much food was being wasted. And I was looking down at the environmental impact of this meal. And also now I know when something's harvested 3 weeks before it's ready and sent to you, there's zero flavor in it. And if it's grown in industrial farms, there's no flavor. So you've got to add salt and fat and sugar. So it's a lot less healthy. Looking at all this food, I realized that despite my pretty in-depth background in the world of food, studied hospitality at Cornell, I worked for all these chefs all over the world. I had never really asked the question, where does food come from? And I got back to New York and I started asking some of my buddies, like some of my finance bro friends, like, guys, where do you think the blueberries are from? And they'd be like, oh, the grocery store. And I was like, shit. And then a couple months later, I'm opening a restaurant in the Bahamas, and I go into the walk-in refrigerator, and everything looks very sad and decrepit. All the lettuce is just sad, and we can't serve it. And we have a 270-seat restaurant. And
it's so sad when I have to throw away food. I hate it. It makes me so sad.
I hope you're composting, but we can get into that in a second.
Oh.
Well, we're going to get into that in a second because we've got to.
I had an ex who did, and it was great, but I don't know.
Okay, well, this is composting. Okay, I'm going to get back to that in one second.
I've been thinking about it. I've been really
well,
wanting to.
This is your sign to start composting, Susie. And you can just throw it in the green bin here in LA.
I don't live here.
Well, you do. You are renting a house here.
I'm
going to give you a little bit of shit here.
Yes.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm not compost shaming you. I'm not compost shaming you. But I sought out a local farmer to get us fresh produce for our restaurant. And I ended up meeting this guy in the film from the Bahamas with the cool hat, Sakane. And I spent 3 hours with Sakane on the farm. He explained to me the challenges he was facing with regards to climate change. He explained to me that there used to be 12,000 farms in the Bahamas. Now there are 1,200. Everything is industrialized, shipped in on styrofoam, wrapped in plastic. There's so much waste, they send it to the landfill and they burn it. He also said that he was one of the only people in his family to go plant-based 20 years ago, and one of the only ones to not develop chronic disease at a time when America was importing lots of fast food and lots of processed food. He also had this deep connection to food and farming, and he was one of the first people to explain to me how deeply interconnected our food system is with our environment, with human health, and with society at large. And after I spent hours with him and was learning about all these challenges he was facing, what he was up against, he also had this remarkable joy and optimism about him. So I was like, Sakane, with all of the shit that you're up against, how do you move forward? How do you think about this? And he said, I said, what's your mission? And he's like, if I can feed people good quality food, I can change the way they look at food, and in turn, change the way they look at life. And that was the moment that I realized that more people needed to meet farmers. And that was the beginning of us creating our film. My little brother was at film school. I called him. He suggested we film an interview with him. And that is what set this whole thing up. And that is what set this whole thing in motion.
He was your DP, right?
Simon, and co-director and the co-founder of our company and everything. And so we did the entire film together. And my point there was that, in saying this sort of a different way, it took me 27 years of my life to meet a farmer and to get out to a farm, despite growing up in the restaurant business, spending my whole life in the world of restaurants. So if someone like me could be so disconnected, it's pretty understandable to see how the majority of people who don't come from a food background at all could be incredibly disconnected. Yeah. And when you're not connected at all, it's easy to eat the processed food and the junk food and to order all the time and to not be connected. So I think we need to approach this next moment with grace, with a sense of understanding, and saying, most people don't want to make the bad decision. Most people, their life is complicated. As we know, there's a lot to do with work and life and love and family and social media, and there's so much shit going on that at the end of the day, sometimes you just want to order takeout, have a glass of wine, and say, fuck off. Yeah. I get it. I do too.
But then I try to be healthy about it, but sometimes,
For sure. I do too. I get it. So we cannot blame the people of the world for, wanting food to just be comforting and delicious at a time when there's so much shit going on.
No, and this is what I'm saying, is that we're both really informed people where we thought we were, and then we weren't. And we're just like kind of catching up to this of
100%.
Being on health. And so if this is a value for us and we're trying to stay up on being really healthy, and yet there's so many blind spots just because, there isn't a lot of awareness about it. So how do you create the shift of creating more awareness?
We make one film at a time. We encourage more people to make films out there. We build one school, we build one hospital farm at a time. We get one person at a time to go to the farmer's market.
So explain the hospital farm real quick.
Yeah, sure. So I meant to say school farm, but also hospital farm. Both.
Because
both.
she did that.
Both.
Didn't she bring like the farmer's market to the hospital and it literally sold out within minutes?
Yes. So this is what I was this is what we've been kind of talking about, is like, we need to build, focus on, support, and scale the models that are working, the models that support the intersection of human and planetary health, and we need to do that all around the country and all around the world. At our school, we built a big regenerative school farm. It has had huge impacts. In the film, we feature a school in Dorchester. You're from Massachusetts. You know this.
Yeah.
Okay. So Dorchester is historically an underserved community with regards to healthy food. Some people call it a food desert. Some people call it food apartheid. It's called a lot of different things, but there are not a lot of healthy food options there. But this school, Codman Academy, is a charter public school that decided to raise extra funds, not allow processed food in the school, hire local chefs to make food with grants from local farms. And they feed kids really great food in that school. I had lunch there. It was honestly delicious.
That's amazing.
It's amazing. So we need more models like that. The hospital question that you asked, Lisa McDowell who was the main nutritionist in Feeding Tomorrow, was so inspired by the healthy food that she was able to heal her dad with that she convinced the leadership of the hospital to build the first working farm on a hospital campus in the United States. They took over, I forget how many acres it is, but a huge piece of land that was just there. This is in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And they built a working farm. They hired a farmer, and they started supplying that hospital with healthy, nutritious food.
With no pesticides.
With no pesticides. It's an organic farm. They have signs around the farm that say, these foods help with this ailment. These foods help with this ailment. And we know that different types of foods, they say to eat the rainbow because all different color foods have different micronutrients, macronutrients, phytochemicals. I can't remember which one helps support which area yet, but each part of the food rainbow.
As above, so below. So if you look at like broccoli or something, it's like it looks like
your lungs.
Your lungs,
100%.
and it's good for your lungs.
Yes.
So it's like God kind of like pieced it together. You
right
know,
there.
The carrots, when you cut them, they look like an eye, and it's like good for your eyes.
Yeah.
Like blows my fucking mind. God, you're amazing. You're amazing.
Again, it's not rocket science. It's a realignment. It's a realignment of our values. It's a realignment of what works and what doesn't work. And I'm a huge believer that if we build these green spaces, these farms and gardens in and around key parts of our world, we can transform the trajectory of our world. And if we don't, we're going to continue to suffer immeasurable consequences. But the good thing is that this doesn't require trillions of dollars. These kinds of investments are the only thing that are going to allow us as a country to be financially soluble moving forward. People wonder why we don't have good healthcare in this country. It's because we are so incredibly sick as a nation that we are spending billions of dollars a year just to treat diseases that are preventable. What if we invested in healthy food for our kids? What if we invested in nutrient-dense soil that supported nutrient-dense food that was also sequestering carbon and building resilience to climate change? Because we know that the food that comes from the best farms, the farms that are taking care of their soil, in a regenerative system, focusing on building pollinators, carbon sequestration, those are the farms that are the most resilient to climate change. When we have big storms, droughts, floods, heat waves, which we have, and we know this from talking to farmers all over the country, we have these issues every single day. We have more extreme weather. And we hear this from Democrats, Republican farmers. It does not matter. Every single farmer agrees that weather is getting more extreme. And these regenerative farms that are the key to producing the nutrient-dense food for humanity, to heal humanity, these are the same farms that are also the most resilient to climate change. So not to say that it's just this, one-stop all shop that's going to fix everything, but kind of is. And if we were to invest in this idea and scale it, not in a size way, but in a number way, we don't need huge regenerative farms. We need thousands of small and medium-sized regenerative farms, millions of small and medium regenerative farms where people are well employed and they're able to take care of their food, and we need to pay them well.
So how do you do that when also Bill Gates, he owns a lot of the farming in Monsanto's, right? Doesn't he own, how much does he own? Doesn't he own a lot of farmland? Tanner, can you look that up? How much farmland he owns? How do you, I guess my question is when you're kind of seeing just land be bought up again and again and again. So how do you implement, with these things that are sort of, it's grappling with, the systems in place, the things that we're pushing up against. And we don't have to say, hey, we're not going to destroy the system. We're going to do a parallel structure, and we're going to offer a solution to, do something different. And so a lot of people will say, oh, okay, cool. And then we're going to use our dollars to have organic food, and also to build these local farms, or, in schools, in hospitals, and wherever we can kind of just have like a little, I have like a garden in the West Village in my own backyard, and I'm like, oh, I could like grow stuff here, and this is great.
Yeah. Not enough to feed yourself everything, but to supplement.
Yeah, some basil here, whatever. But and so I guess there's several things happening. So it's like integrating nature into our lives. It's trying to pick better, like just being informed about what's like better programs to watch, being more informed about what's happening with our health, and I guess it's kind of a little by little kind of thing, right? It's kind of like a slow adjustment. Like when I was trying to figure out, what was toxic. Like here's the thing. Like this is a little microcosm of the macro, where just in my own little life of going through all the perfumes that I had and being like, I don't want to throw all these out, but I had to start buying something new. I had to start using perfumes that weren't toxic. So I'm like, I'm not ready to depart with those. Like I can still have them, put them on my clothes, maybe not my skin, because I would notice I would get like a rash immediately for some certain things. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to start implementing new things, and I'll start integrating those. And so it was kind of like, I can't, when you look at your pantry, for instance, and you're like, everything's toxic, like you can be really aggressive and get all rid of it. But like, it's sort of, you can't do this, pendulum swing, because it's just not sustainable. You want to go back. So it's like a little by little by little. But then, there are some, how much is the land, T? Do we know?
Yeah.
Does it say?
Bill Gates owns 275,000 acres of U.S. farmland.
And how much is that?
A lot. It's probably one of the biggest single person landowners. But I also on the other side of that, I do know there are some families that I know who are also some of the biggest landowners in the United States, and they are working on large scale restoration and regenerative practices around their land.
And so when I watched OMG GMO, right, and they were saying, I mean, that was like, I think I watched that like back in like 2012 or 13, and that blew my fucking mind, that GMOs, I was like, GMOs, of these pesticides that are just, is that glyphosate? Is that Roundup?
Roundup is the most common, glyphosate is the most commonly used pesticide or herbicide, I believe. And it was formerly in Roundup, but it's also now is an open patent, and it's been used sort of everywhere.
So what they were saying,
yes, it has historically been the largest applied herbicide.
And what they were saying on the farms is that the minute their crops, like the GMO, so it was patent. So even if it creeps over on somebody else's farm, and now you have the GMOs that are on your farm, that's now theirs because they have a patent on it.
Yeah.
And then, you hear about these seeds where I think
Terminator seeds?
Yeah, so these farmers are given the seeds, but now because
they
can't reproduce. So you have this like epidemic of, things that have happened with Monsanto's and Bayer teaming up.
Now Bayer, yeah. So Monsanto was, they started to get so many lawsuits against them.
Literally.
And God. They were like, well, I think we're kind of fucked. And then Bayer bought them up. So that's why I was saying that I believe 80 to 90% of the seeds that are sold in this country are owned and sold by a foreign government. Bayer, which is a German company. So that's pretty fucked up.
Aren't they? Don't they have like they help, like their number one thing is Hodgkin's lymphoma, and then the biggest cause of Monsanto's is Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Yeah. You're like, it's the plot of.
That's weird.
You're like,
why is that happening? I don't know.
It's literally the plot of just like a horror movie.
Dude.
So
It's literally
that's like the bad plot of like a Bond
Marvel.
movie.
No, it's a Marvel movie. It's Bond.
Yeah,
I'm like
the
Klaus
plot.
Schwab is suddenly you know, the
Like
bear,
classic
the
evil. No, it's almost comically evil. Almost. If it wasn't so detrimental, it would be comically evil.
I mean, it's a satire. We're living in a satire. The aliens are having a great time, or God's being like, yeah.
And what's interesting is like genetic modification is the technology itself is not the issue. It's how it's been deployed. Like humanity has been breeding plants to optimize for drought resistance or productivity for a very long time. We still, in seed banks all over the world, there's like 1,300 seed banks all over the world that have every single type of plant, every single type of seed that has ever existed. And where we've always been sort of trying to, blend these two to, this one's really drought resistant and this one produces a lot of corn. Like that's fine. But the way that the genetic modification has been implemented has been to ensure that these plants can withstand the maximum amount of chemicals and pesticides and herbicides possible. So it is almost comically evil. I think back in the day, it maybe started with, decent intentions, but it is so clearly a broken, destructive, horrifying system.
After a point where it's bad and it's causing harm, and when you have that many lawsuits against you, it's just like, when I think of the Sackler family, and they knew it was bad and they knew what they were doing and they did it anyway. Vioxx, same thing. Mm-hmm. I took Vioxx as a kid to help. I had a stress fracture on my back, and it's kind of like a souped up Advil, so it doesn't give you any like, ooh, I'm feeling hot. Like it's just, it would get rid of the pain, but it caused 50 to 60,000 deaths. And they knew that it was going to kill people. They did it anyway. They're like, we're going to make billions. And guess what? Like, it's sort of, no one went to jail. Everything's fine. And it's sort of,
you have a lot of money, no, you go to jail.
And then you have 86 with the vaccine law with, they weren't able to make any money. So I guess what happened was, pharmaceuticals were like, hey, listen, we're trying to put out vaccines that, I think for a time it was like, okay, really, like, hey, this is really helpful to us, but there's been so many injuries that we can't sell this. Like, we can't make a profit. This is going to kill us. And so I think, was it Reagan who put that into place, where it was like, okay, we're going to pass this law, so you can't sue them. And so here we are. So that basically, it's like the pharmaceutical when it's completely, when there's no consequences for killing a bunch of people or injuring a bunch of people, like it sort of is setting this precedent that's kind of hard to get over. And then, it's not lost on me on the FDA, like the FDA connection with big pharma. So, and I'm not talking, I don't want to go back to doom and gloom, but there is sort of like, we can slowly implement these things, which I think is really, really great. But yeah, I guess countering a lot of the laws that are still in place. How do we solve that problem? Because when you look at the 1909 Rockefeller thing that everything is kind of based on, or these.
I think the only way to effectively change what is so broken is to create an absolute tsunami of public awareness to where people demand that new laws are made.
Yeah.
I think the only way to affect real positive, lasting change is for enough people to stand up and say, we're tired of this shit and we need to move in a new direction. And that is what we have that is what we are in the early stages of, and that is what we are going to continue to do. We meet people all over the country and all over the world. Farmers, activists, nutritionists, entrepreneurs, educators who are fighting for a healthier food system, who know that it's broken and who are working to fix it. And we are going to get to a point where there is a momentum building, and there will continue to be a momentum building that is going to push people into the streets. I said it before and I will say it again. That is what is coming within the next 5 years, I believe, because the system is so insanely broken and people are finally waking up to it. There is not a person that I know, maybe you don't know, who doesn't have or hasn't had a relative who had cancer or has cancer or knows a relative who is obese or has diabetes. We're at the point now where it has affected everybody in this country. Everybody knows somebody who's been impacted by the food system. And it is our job as storytellers, whether it's podcasts or film, to elevate these issues, to shine light on them, and to say, we're not going to waste our time fighting the old. We are going to shine a light on the old and the broken and the dead and the decrepit, but then we're going to shine an even brighter light on the path forward. And we're going to showcase and support through our dollars, through policy, the innovators that are moving us in the right direction. And that is the attitude and that is the vision that I'd like to lead with, and I think we should be leading with.
Oliver, thank you so much. That's a great place to end it. So we can kind of fight things with our dollars, like Walmart. I think that, or with also writing letters and saying, hey, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore.
And support. Go to the farmers market when you can. Support organic regenerative. The label that you see it more and more in grocery stores. It's a huge opportunity. Just to one more thing on your point earlier, you don't need to go into your grocery. You don't need to go into your fridge, your cabinet, and throw away everything. Start by the next time you go to the store, buy one ingredient that is more local. Buy one ingredient that has the organic regenerative label. See what that feels like. See what that tastes like. It's going to have more flavor because it comes from better soils, 100%.
Yeah.
Start with one ingredient. The next time you go to the grocery store, do 2 ingredients and go and do like that, because that's the only way we can do it. It needs to be a gradual shift that is then magnified at a certain point.
100%. So Oliver, they can find you on Instagram, Oliver English, and your film Feeding Tomorrow on Apple and Amazon.
Apple TV and Amazon Prime, yep. And our production company is Common Table Creative, and we work with food companies, NGOs, and nonprofits to share these stories on a broad scale as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Susie.
All right. Thanks, guys. That was such an important episode. I would love to hear your comments, and please like and subscribe so we can get on that algorithm and you can see more of our latest episodes.
A whole nother level.